Chapter 14 starts off to be about the Finches. And they no longer heard it from their auntie or from Atticus about the Finches, but they heard plenty of it from the town. And so they became the talk of the town, and people would say, look, there's some Finches. And they would say something about how they can go loose and rape up the countryside and all kinds of stuff. And so the kids are noticing these things, and the town is completely just talking about them, which has to do with Tom Robinson's case. And that made Scout ask Atticus one night, what's rape? And so he looks at her kind of strange, and he says, here's what it is. He said, it's carnal knowledge of a female by force without her consent. And so the Scout doesn't really understand the definition, so she says, well, if that's all that he did, and that's all that it is, why did Calpurnia, yell at her or freak out when she asked Calpurnia what it was? And then Calpurnia told her to ask Atticus, but she forgot. Anyway, when she tells him that, she says that they went to Calpurnia's church, and Atticus's ears perked up, and he says, you went to Calpurnia's church? And she says, yes'm. She took us, and she promised me that I could come to her house, is what Scout says, and she's excited about going to Cal's house, and so she asks, and apparently Aunt Alexandra is outside the door, and she says, you may not, and she chimes in, and she answers for Atticus, and so then Scout snaps back and she goes, I didn't ask you. And then she gets in trouble by Atticus, and he says, you apologize to your aunt right now. And then she's whining and she's like, but I didn't ask her. And so then he goes, let's get this clear. These are the ground rules. You do as Calpurnia tells you, you do as I tell you, and you definitely do as your aunt tells you around this house. Do you understand? And she says that she understands, although she doesn't quite understand. But as Atticus and Aunt Alexandra are leaving the bedroom, Aunt Alexandra says, you've got to do something about her, Atticus. And she's always complaining about Scout and her behavior and that she's a tomboy, and basically just says it right in front of her, and Scout just feels like her aunt doesn't even like her. And so Atticus kind of stands up for her, and he's arguing with Aunt Alexandra, and he says, I don't see any harm in letting her go hang out with Cal. Cal would look after her just as well as she does here. And so basically, Aunt Alexandra says that she wants to get rid of Cal, that she is not needed around the household with her there anymore. And Atticus says, absolutely not. We need her now more than ever, and she's not leaving this house unless she wants to. And so he does put his foot down, and Aunt Alexandra says, but Atticus, and he says, nope, that's the end of the conversation. So Scout is relieved, but she is definitely angry with her aunt. And then Scout and Jim have been they talk about their dad and Aunt Alexandra fighting, and he says, they've been fussing again, Scout. And so now they are kind of coming together. It seemed like a couple of weeks ago or a couple of chapters before, Scout and Jim weren't getting along very well, and that they were kind of in different places. And so this is bringing them together, them fighting. And he tells her the advice, try not to antagonize Aunt Alexandra, because it's only going to make things worse. So just be nice to her, and even if you don't want to, and that way Atticus doesn't have to worry about it. And she's like, well, what's wrong with Atticus? What does he have to worry about? And he goes, the Tom Robinson case. It's what's worrying him to death. And so Scout thinks about it a little bit, and then he continues to go on, and he's like, well, it's different with grown folks, Scout. And she interrupts him, and she yells at him, and she goes, who do you think you are, Jim? Because he's, just a few years older than her. He's not a grown-up yet. And they get in a big old fight, and they're literally, she says that they're still equals. Like, Jim, we're equals here. And so, quit acting all high and mighty. And then they start, wrestling around and fighting each other. And Atticus pops in. He says, both of you go to bed right now. And then he asks who started the fight. And Scout chimes in. She said, Jim did. He's trying to tell me what to do. I don't have to mind him now, too, do I? She says. And Atticus smiles, and he basically says, how about this? You mind Jim when he can make you. Is that fair? And she says, yes. And, of course, Aunt Alexandra was present. She was just standing there looking and listening. And Scout and Jim say goodnight to each other. So even though they were just fighting, because Aunt Alexandra was there, they kind of reunite again. So that's nice. And they're trying to go to bed. And the next thing you know, Scout says, hey, Jim, what does a snake feel like? And he's like, kind of rough, blah, 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 cold, all this stuff. And he goes, are you joking around or are you being serious? And she goes, I'm being serious. So Jim gets up, he checks under the bed, he tries to make her feel safe because they're reunited again, right? Even though they were just literally at each other's throats and fighting. A lot of sibling rivalry and behavior there. And so after he looks under the bed, Jim says, it's not a snake, it's somebody. And she's like, what? And eventually a filthy brown package comes moving from out of the bed, and it's Dill's head. It's Dill. And so Jim says, gosh almighty, and he freaks out and he's scared, but he says he's not scared. And Dill says, man, I am about to die. I am starving. Do you have anything to eat? And Jim and Scout are shocked to see him, and they ask him a million questions like, how did you get here? And do your parents know where you are? Does Aunt Rachel know where you are? And the next thing you know, Atticus's voice says, I bet he's hungry. And he pops in, and Dill freaks out and he says, Mr. Finch, please don't tell Aunt Rachel. Don't make me go back there. Please, sir. I will run off again. And so Atticus says, whoa, calm down. Nobody's going to make you do anything. I'm just going to go over and tell Miss Rachel where you are and that you're safe and see if you could spend the night with us. And so Dill is happy about that. Scout is happy about that. And so is Jim. And so he leaves the room, and the next thing you know, Miss Rachel is screaming in the house, and she finds out that he's there, but she does let him stay the night, and Scout and Jim and Dill start getting into some pajamas and getting comfy, and they try to ask him why he ran off, and he basically just said, oh, Scout said, did you do all the things that you said you did in your letter to me? And he goes, no, they just said they were going to do those things with me, and they never did. And he says that his parents just aren't interested in him, and that's why he ran away. And so while he's explaining everything, Scout finds herself wondering what her life would be like if she was in Dill's situation. So she is putting herself in his shoes and being empathetic, and she can't even imagine that. So she does feel kind of bad for him. And then she asks if they're mean, if his parents are mean to him, and like, do they hurt him? And he goes, oh no, they're not mean at all. They kiss and hug me and stuff like that, and they say they love me. But and then he just stops and he goes, Scout, let's have a baby. Where do babies come from? And so then they talk about where babies come from. And I think this is basically just to show that, like, you know, he wants a better life, and he knows that, you know, he's an only child, and so he's always wanted siblings, and maybe he's talking about them having a baby in the future because babies bring joy and happiness and such. And so eventually Dill is talking himself to sleep, and he's nodding off, and Scout says, Dill, and he says, yeah. And then she goes, why do you think Boo Radley never ran off? Like, you ran off, and he had a way worse life than you, but why do you think that is? And Dill says, maybe he did not have anywhere to run off to. So that's where the chapter ends, and I think Dill is feeling lucky that he has people, even if his family don't care about him and ignore him.